Hello and welcome to the second part of this recording on securing your Azure App Service using the Sophos XG Firewall. So, in the previous video, what we did was we went through the deployment of this Azure vNet, right? And then we had the Sophos XG Firewall with the two security subnets, the front end and the back end subnet. And then we had this other subnets deployed where we have a management server that had Visual Studio installed. And then we deployed the Azure App Service environment, the App Service Plan, and web application. And now we have internal access from other resources within our VNet into the app service environment, and then we're able to deploy into it. And what I want to mention is this is the case also is if let's say you have your hybrid connection to Sophos XG Firewall, all you need to do is have a route table that says um, to your Azure App Service environment subnet that anything going to the local subnet on the remote side sent it to the XG. So that's all you need, not anything else, but just for the remote site. So that's all you need, and then you have to have the proper firewall rules configured on both ends, and then you should be able to access this. So you can use that to host internal applications or internal or business applications. But what happens in the sense of if you want this to be an external application, but you just want the control and the visibility that you may not get, or the level that you may not get if you were to just go for the multi-tenant Azure App Service environment, and then the security on top of that, right? So you're not being able to configure the kind of security that you may want, something that the Sophos XG Firewall can provide you with. Then you can go for this option that we've just described. But now to the next part. Here's what I'll be doing in the rest of this part. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to configure routing to work properly. So what do I mean by that? I want to, because what essentially will be happening is this. Is number one, I will have this Azure, this public IP address, which I'll select this public IP address, and I'll have that pointing to the Sophos XG. And it's going to be terminating because the Sophos XG firewall will be the web application server, and it can do beyond that, and we'll see some of those. So providing all those security features or security control. But it's going to terminate at the Sophos XG firewall, and then another connection between the Sophos XG firewall and your backend, the ILB of the Azure App Service environment. But when the XG firewall wants to talk to the Azure App Service environment, I want to be able to control how the traffic flows so that it goes out through the backend subnet. It doesn't try to go out through this front-end subnet. And to do that, I'm going to use a static route. And the static route will look like this. Every in the Azure subnet, there's a default Azure router for the subnet, which usually points to the first IP address of the subnet. So this backend subnet is 10.10.253. The first IP, which is 10.10.253.1, is the IP address that associated with the Azure router for that subnet. What I'll be doing is configuring on the Sophos XG to say anything that wants to go to 10.10.5.0/24. Don't try to send it out this front-end interface. I want you to send it through the back-end interface to this Azure router, which will now be responsible to get it to the app service environment subnet. So that's the next thing I'll do now. So let's go to do that. So I'm already logged into my Sophos XG. I know a LAN port is port A. That's 10.10.253. So what I'll do is I'll copy 10.10.253 only, and then I'll go on the routing on routing, or however you pronounce it. I click on add, and I specify anything going to 10.10.5.0/24, send it to 10.10.253.1, which is the Azure gateway for the backend subnet, and backend security subnet, and I'll specify send it out of port A, which is the backend interface. So specify that and click saved that. So we have that configured. Now we can move on. So the next step that we'll be doing is we're going to be spending time on the Sophos XG Firewall and also on this side of Azure. What I'm going to be doing is on the Sophos XG Firewall, I'm going to add this additional IP. What happens is by default, I have this IP address, public IP, that's already linking to this 10.10.254.4. So whenever I go to this public IP address, it's already linked to this one. So anything that comes with that public IP gets sent here. But I don't want to use this same IP for publishing. There's nothing wrong in me using it, but I just want to use this to show you how to configure this other configuration. If I want to use a separate IP, what I can do is I can create a new IP configuration in Azure and then point that to the XG as an additional IP. So that's what I'll do next. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go to my Sophos XG Firewall in Azure. So let's go, I'll filter that by my prefix, which is DO, and I have my XG Firewall here. And what I'll do is I'll go on the networking. It's a really straightforward process actually. I'll go on the networking. And hopefully that opens quickly. And port A being my backend, and then port B being my front end, which is the one. First thing that I'll do before I go ahead and add the additional IP is you can see that this one only allows a few ports. I also want to allow port 80 and 443 inbound, so I'll go ahead and add those now. So I'll add HTTP allow, and I'll add HTTPS allowed. And I'll change the priority to something else so there's no conflict, and I'll click OK. So I should have HTTP and HTTPS. And then while those are creating, I'll click on port P network interface here, which is for the one network interface of the XG, and I'll go under IP configurations. And under IP configurations, this is where I'm going to go and add a new IP configuration for the Sophos XG firewall. So if I go ahead and add, and I'm going to give the IP configuration a name. I'll call it DOXG app config. It's going to be a secondary IP. I'm going to give it a private IP address in the front end subnet. So I'll give it 10.10.254.10. The original one is 10.10.254.4. So what I'm doing is I'm giving it 10.10.254.10 is what I'm giving this, and I'll add that here. And I'll enable public IP and configure a new public IP. So for the public IP, what I'll do is I'll create a new one. I'll call it DOXG app PIP for public IP. I'll make it static. I'll click OK. And I'll go ahead and click OK to this. And that's going to create this new IP configuration. So essentially what I've done, or what I'm doing here, if I bring up the diagram, is I have this new, what's that? Let's go for this. So I have this new public IP configuration that will be pointing to this private IP configuration. But what I'm now going to do is I'm going to configure the XG to listen on this or for this address also, or to this address. So what that will mean is I'll have two IP configurations. It's just essentially an additional IP on the Sophos XG. So that's what I'm going to do. So I've done this from within Azure. So hopefully that's completed now, but I need to let the XG know about this address so it can listen on it also. So what I'll do is I'll leave this. I'll go to bring up this one. I'll make a note of this IP first of all before doing anything else. So that's my public IP. It's 52.232. No, 61.111, and you use yours in this case. But I'll just make a note of that. I'll go within my Sophos XG. I'll go on the network, on the interface. I'll go on the hard interface and add an alias, and that will be for port B, which is my one port. And I'll give that 10.10.254.10. And I'll go ahead and click save on that. And now I have 254.4 and 254.10, essentially what I have in this diagram here. And the XG is listening to both. And now I can go to this IP address and I should be able to get to the XG's web admin. So I can go to that second IP. So this is not this first IP, so this is 52.174. Second one is 52.232. And if I press enter to that, I'm getting to the web admin of the XG. So that means the XG is listening to that. So that's very good. So that's all configured for the XG. So now I can use this IP address for my web application. So now let's go ahead and configure the web application security. In this phase, we have two parts to look at. So this is the internal domain name for this ASE, and my web app itself is DOASE web app dot this internal domain name. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure a custom domain name for this web app for www.theokayode.xyz. So now you can begin to see the importance of what I mentioned earlier when I mentioned that ensure that you do not use your main domain name here, because assuming I've used theokayode.xyz here, I cannot use this, configure this as a custom domain here, right? So which is why I added ASE to the front so there's no conflict later on. So what I'll do is I'll add to my web app and say, I want you to also respond to this name that's going to be your external name, www.dokayode.xyz. But also because I want to make it HTTPS available, reachable by HTTPS, I'm going to have to configure the certificate on that. So if I go back, so the way I'll do that is if I go to under Azure App Services, and under Azure App Services, I'll go under my web app and I'll scroll to under custom domains is what I want. Here we are, custom domains. And what I'll do is number one, it's set to listen to both HTTP and HTTPS. If I want to, I can set this to HTTPS only. So I'll just do that, make it HTTPS only. And then I'll go ahead and add a new custom host name. So I'll call this www.theokayode.xyz, and I'll go ahead and add that host name. So the next thing that is going to ask me to do is to configure, because I've set this to SSL to HTTPS only, it's going to ask me to configure the SSL binding, which I can do from here, but I can also go under SSL certificates in the web app configuration, and I can upload a public certificate that I already got. So if you're not familiar with this site called SSL for free, so I'll bring this up, SSLforfree.com. It's a really good site. So it uses Let's Encrypt in the backend. So this is why I use it, free SSL certificates. So it uses Let's Encrypt. So long as you own that domain name, it will allow you. So I own that domain name, so it's going to allow me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my certificate, in this case that certificate.pfx, which contains both certificate and the private key, and I'll put in the password. So let's get the password that I use to protect this and go ahead and click on upload. So the certificate is added. You can see the names in the certificate, which is www.dokyoearly.xyz and dokyoearly.xyz. I'll go ahead and add the binding from here. So I'll add the binding to for www.dokyoearly.xyz for the certificate that I uploaded just now, and it's an SNI SSL. So I'll go ahead and add binding. So in essence, what I've done now, which binding is successful, if I go back on the custom domains, I should see my custom domain now has that SSL binding in front of it. So that's it, and the SNI SSL binding there. So I've configured this on the web app, but also I have to configure this on the Sophos XG alongside with the web server protection on the Sophos XG. And I'm going to say specifically to it to use this new IP address that I configured. So I'm not using the same one I'm using for management for exposing my service. So let's go ahead and do that on the Sophos XG. So I go on the Sophos XG firewall, configure web server protection. I go on the web servers. I had a new web server. So I'll call this my ASE WebApp, and I'm going to create a new host for it, which I'll call ASE WebApp also. IP address. So the IP address I'm going to specify, if you listen carefully to this, will be the IP address of the ILB of my ASE, because that's the only IP that we have. That's the endpoint for anything that's going to be distributed to the backend instances and for the app service plan. The entry point is that single IP that for the internal load balancer, which we obtained earlier. Remember that we got that by going to my app service environment again, and under my app service environment I can go under the properties and I can get the virtual IP. That's what I'm going to be pointing to. That's the ILB IP. I can either get it from under IP addresses here, but I have to be careful to select the private one. So that's this one. Or I can go under properties and just select the private IP address or virtual IP address. So I select that, and that's what I'm going to point to here. 10.10.5.11, and I'm going to click on save. Okay, so and I'm going to make it HTTPS. I already made the backend also just HTTPS only, so that's going to be HTTPS. I'm going to leave all this for now. You can read more on Sophos website on all those other configurations. I'm going to add those. Then I'm going to go to under protection policies and add a new protection policy. So I'll call this my ASE WebApp policy, and I'll set the mode to, you can set it to monitor if you just want to see what kinds of attack it detects, or you can set it to reject if I want it to reject any form of a detected attack. So I'll set it to reject for now. Enable cookie sign. I can select any form of protections that I want to enable. So you can see the power of this. If you're using something like the Azure App Gateway, you don't have antivirus scanning, for example. With this, you can have dual antivirus scanning with the industry-leading Sophos antivirus engine. So I can have, for example, use the Sophos antivirus engine for uploads and download scanning. I can block unscannable content if I want to. So there's a whole lot of tutorials that Sophos have that will take you through all these different features. So for now, I'll block clients with bad reputation, which is lookup, backend lookup, intelligence powered by Sophos Labs, common threat filter. I'll go ahead and enable that and enable all the different protection that you're probably familiar with, things like SQL injection and XSX attacks protection. And I'll go ahead and just save that. There's much more that I could do. There are other forms of protections that I could configure, but again, I'll just leave it at this one for now because it's just a demonstration. So now having configured this policy, I go on the firewall on the Sophos XG Firewall, and I'll just initially disable this default rule. I'm going to add a new firewall rule, and I'm going to add a business application rule. So that's what we use for WAF configuration. And I'll select web server protection here. And I'll call this rule name ASE WebApp WAF. So it's more than WAF, but I'll just call the rule name that. And hosted address. So I can either select port A, which is the backend IP, I don't want that, or port B, which is the first IP address that I'm using for management, which I want to keep for management. And then, or I can select the additional IP that I added, which is what I want. So I'll select the additional IP, and I'm going to say use HTTPS. I can even say if anything comes with HTTP redirected to HTTPS. I'm going to leave that for now. Now I have to configure a certificate. So here I've probably made the mistake now that I have to go back because I needed to add a certificate before coming to this stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all cancel out of this one and come back. I'll go under certificates. I'll go ahead and add a new certificate. And the same certificate that I uploaded to the backend here for www.dokod, I'm going to enable that on this also. So that same certificate. So I'm going to enable that. So that's set for www.dokod.xyz. I'm going to enable that certificate. So let's go. I'm going to enable that certificate here. Set for www.dokod.xyz, just to make it short. So I'm going to upload that certificate here. Same one. So I'll call this www.dokod.xyz underscore cert. And the format is in PFX. And I'll choose the same certificate, which is this certificate, and I'll put in my passphrase that I used to protect the certificate. And then I'll go ahead and save that. So uploading certificate, if I want to, you could generate a certificate sign-in request, but I already have my certificate that I got from SSL. So what I'll do in this case is while it's doing this, I'll probably pause the recording and I'll come back once it's done. So certificates fully uploaded now. So, and you can see the subject's names there. So that's dokod.xyz. I go under my firewall and go back to the configuration I was doing earlier. So add the new firewall rule, business application rule, select web application, web server protection. I'll call it ASE WebApp WAF rule. Select my additional IP, select HTTPS, select my certificate. Now it's going to detect the names in the certificate. Now I only want to use www.dokod.xyz, and I'm going to select that. For the web server that is pointing to in the backend, I'll select ASE WebApp, which is pointing to the ILB of the ASE. So allowed client network, if I want to block, I can. So I can configure authentication if I want to. I can add some extensions if I need to, but again, I'm not going to. I'm going to cancel. Now for protection policy, I can select the policy I configured earlier, which is the ASE WebApp policy. And this is very important in this case. Remember to select the option to pass the host header. If you don't select this, you may run into issues. So I'll select the option to pass the host header, and I'll go ahead and click save for this one. So that's all saved now. So essentially, my configuration is all done now. But what I need to do is I need to now configure, go to my public DNS, which is on GoDaddy, and configure www.dokod.xyz and say to it to point to that public IP. So which I made a note of. So if I go back, I have my public IP. Let me log into my GoDaddy account first of all and go into my DNS. So I'm just doing this off screen. Once I'm signed into it, I'll bring it on screen. So DNS, So let's go. So if I go on the DNS, I can go on the www, edit that and point that to my public IP. And if I go ahead and save that, so www.dokod.xyz would now be pointing to this public IP. And then the XG is going to do is security checks. And if everything checks out, it's going to forward it to the backend, and we should be able to get to that. So what I'll do is I'll bring this one up, give it a while. I'll pause the recording now, give it a while for the DNS to take effect. It could take a while to take effect. So once DNS has fully taken effect, and once I confirm that it's now resolving to my public IP, the name, then we'll come back to test it out and then conclude this recording. Hello and welcome back. So DNS already took effect. So let's go to what I'll do is on the XG firewall, I'll open log viewer and I'll just filter for web server protection. And if I go ahead and run this one, so let's see if I go ahead and do https www.dokod.xyz and I press enter to that, and now I'm logged into my web application. And that's amazing. So you can see, I can begin to see all the different um, connections that are going on to my web app, and see it's kind of visibility that you could not have seen otherwise. Even though you want the flexibility and the agility and the scalability and the feature set that the Azure App Service provides, you do not have to compromise security to achieve that. You do not have to compromise visibility and compliance to achieve that. That's what things like the Sophos XG Firewall provides you with. So having this, what I can do now is, for example, I can go back to my server, backend server, make some more changes and publish it to the web app. So for example, if I go back to my index and change that to this is now version 2 and then add whatever, go ahead and publish this and publish that. So accept the certificate, fully publishing complete, which it's done. According to this, it's successfully published. So if I go back to bring up my web app again, so if I refresh, and here you go, so it's already updated the app. So, and I can have continuous deployment and have that scalability there. So I have this flexibility with Azure App Services, but still I have the security. And here's the other thing that I like about Sophos XG Firewall is that now I've just configured. So if I refresh this, you can see that traffic showing traffic coming out in and out and going out. If I go ahead and edit that, I don't just have to use just web application firewall protection, which as you saw includes the powerful Sophos antivirus engine and other the Avira antivirus engine. I can even layer on top of that IPS protection, right? And I can layer on top of that traffic shaping rules if I wanted to. So I can layer on top of that. So if something is not caught by WAF or by the antivirus engine, you can see I have IPS protection layered on top of that. So just this one to show you a quick test of maybe what you see in terms of if an attack were to be taking place. I'll do a quick test. And to do that, I'll use this website that I can use to test SQL injection. So what I'll do is I'll go to put in my URL here, and I'll go ahead and submit that. And why it's going on, if I go ahead and refresh, and now you can see my web server protection already detected and said, hey, something is wrong with the requests that I'm getting, and it's blocking those. And you can see it's classifying those as SQL injection probings, and it's already detected and is blocking those. So you get that security as part of this. I hope this all makes sense to you now. So this is how you configure this. What you can see, this is not something that you configure lightly. If you're used to be an IT pro, um, this is a new environment, right? Because now you're not dealing with servers, you're dealing with services. But alongside with those services comes a lot of power. You go under this, for example, you go under properties, yeah. If I go under my web app here, what happens if I need to scale? Do I need to run around and be deploying servers, managing config, transferring config, and all those stuff? No, there's a lot of features here. So just look at all those features. I can go ahead and clone my application easily. It's just an amazing service that you may want to use, right? This is some of the reasons why you move to the cloud. But while you're doing that, do not compromise security. If I wanted to scale out, I just click on scale out. I didn't have to move configurations across or copy it across. All I need to do is I go ahead and just drag and drop and increase my instance count. So you can see the maximum for that is 100. So I can enable all the scaling for this one, and for the XG firewall, I can have more than one and then load balance all the instances. Sophos supports that. So I hope this makes sense to you, and I hope this has been very useful to you. Apologies that it went much longer than expected, but to be able to explain some of these concepts, actually, I feel that I've gone um, where I've watched things that I would have loved to, but hopefully you're still able to get something out of this. The steps that I followed, I'll put them in the description below. The link that I use for testing, I'll put that in the description below. And if you have any questions regarding this, reach out to me. I'll be happy to help. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I'll see you in my next recording. So this is the first day of the new year. Happy New Year. Have a great one.